When speaking of enumerated powers, in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18 of the United States Constitution, it reads, "To make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States." What is your interpretation of the necessary and proper clause, and do you feel this, paired with the Commerce Clause, gives the federal government unlimited and unchecked powers?
Clearly, paired with the Commerce Clause, it does not give unlimited and unchecked powers. But there have been debates. Mike has talked about George Washington since the very beginning as to what that means, and let me give you a historic example that shows how difficult it is to be as simplistic about this as some people have been. One of the very first decisions that the Congress made was whether or not to create a U.S. bank. It was, frankly, Merrill, the form of the Federal Reserve System back in the 1780s, 1790s. Madison, the father of the Constitution, said it was clearly unconstitutional and not allowed under the enumerated powers. There were 7 members of the Constitutional Convention in the House of Representatives that voted on that bill. They voted 4-3 in favor of the bill, with Madison, one of the 3, voting no. It then went to Washington to sign. He was sufficiently concerned about the constitutionality of it that he asked his cabinet to give him opinions. His Attorney General, Edmund Randolph, said it is clearly unconstitutional and not under the enumerated powers. His Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, said it is clearly unconstitutional and not under the enumerated powers. His Secretary of the Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, said it is clearly constitutional, well within the enumerated powers, and you should do it. Washington chose to follow Hamilton and signed the bill, and it became law. Interestingly enough, later on in his presidency, Thomas Jefferson, who originally thought it was a terrible idea and unconstitutional, came to decide that the U.S. Bank was a good idea and more or less embraced it in his second term. Let us not be so sure that everyone understands every word of Article 1, Section 8, that it is clear that there will never be any dispute, because there was dispute all the way back to the people who helped write it. And Madison discovered the great truth of American politics in that time, which was, whoever disagrees with George Washington loses.
A careful reading of Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18 will have you understand that this clause allows the foregoing powers previously defined, the first 1 through 17 in Article 1, Section 8, to be carried out. If you were granted power 1 through 17, you have the power to carry out things like create a mint under Article 1, Section 8, Clause 5. The 9th and 10th Amendments very clearly, specifically, and exactly state that if we didn't give you the power of national government, you do not have that power. We've retained all other powers.
The necessary and proper clause should be to limit the federal government's power to only do the things that are enumerated. But they have failed to do that. We have an education department. We have an energy department. We have an interior department. All that have been built outside of the enumerated powers so that government can get more power and more control over our society. Federalism, the separation of states' rights and the federal government, has been ignored. The Constitution is not being followed because we have a government that wants to get so much control and power, tax us to death, and take away our ability to be free and determine our own lives. They want to guarantee the outcome, not the opportunity. And we've got to get back to fundamentally getting government out of our lives by ending those government programs and sending power back to the people and back to the states.
Here's what happens when government becomes so intrusive in these ways of going beyond enumerated powers. About 5 years ago, the health insurance that we self-purchase for my family, it went up, and it went up again. And so we cut back on our coverage, we increased our deductibles, and then it went up again and again. In 5 years, even with cutting back and expanding the deductible, our insurance is now twice what it was 5 years ago, and it is the #1 budget item we have, beyond our mortgage and car payments combined. That is what happens when the government starts intruding.
Senator, with all due respect, you may have spent 18 years on the Senate Banking Committee, but if you think the U.S. Bank, the bank system that existed at the time of Andrew Jackson, was anything like the Federal Reserve System we have today, you need to go back maybe to UVU here, take Economics and Constitutional Law 101, because it is nothing like that. They didn't have fiat money. They didn't create over a weekend an extra $2 trillion to bail out some of these programs that the Democrats and Republicans have joined in on. And furthermore, on enumerated powers, you got to look at the 10th Amendment. That's why we need to take the Department of Education, the Department of Commerce, and the Department of Energy and take them right out of Washington, bring them back to the states.
All right, now back to the question. The preamble of the Constitution says to promote the general welfare, not to provide it. In Article 1, Section 8, that became the elastic clause where it says to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper. This started happening at the turn of the century with Woodrow Wilson, and that it increased under FDR. I must say that in Article 1, Section 8, it says, again, it says to provide for the common defense and general welfare, but that is applicable only to the limited enumerated powers in Article 1, Section 8. And so I do agree with my colleagues up here who are saying we have to rely on the 10th Amendment. Patrick Henry was right. We need sovereignty in our states to bring back the power to the people.
We're all feeling the results and the effects of our federal government intruding into our lives and into our businesses. We're all feeling it. It's a dangerous thing. It takes away our rights. It gets into our pockets. It gets into everything. Okay, and of course it needs to be limited. It needs to go back to where the federal government needs to go back within the purview of the Constitution, the way it's stated, and take care of the business that's enumerated there and stay out of everything else.
You should interpret the phrase to regulate commerce as being to make commerce regular or have everything in common, not to micromanage commerce. And a perfect example would be in healthcare. To make regular commerce would be to have all the states open up their citizens to be able to purchase the insurance from any other state, and Obamacare to be the micromanage approach, which is unconstitutional.
I'd like to respond to a comment made by our senator just a minute ago. I don't mean to suggest for an instant, not an instant, that everyone will always agree on what the Founding Fathers intended. It's sometimes difficult to discern. But the fact that a question is difficult to answer or that people might not always agree on it doesn't mean the question isn't important to ask and answer. Nor does it mean that there isn't such thing as a true answer or a correct answer or a wrong answer. The fact is Article 1, Section 8 does not give Congress the power to redistribute our wealth. It does not give them the power to bail out failing banks or auto companies, and it doesn't give them the power to tell us we have to buy something even if we don't want it.
And of course, that's one man's interpretation of that clause. And again, he's correct. It's an issue that goes back all the way to the beginning founding fathers. They had this same discussion. And here we are, 220 some odd years, and we still don't have a definitive answer. What I tell you that we need to do is we do need to follow the Constitution, and we need to once and for all have a constitutional amendment that specifically answers this question. That's the only way we're going to resolve it, or in another 220 years, we'll be having the same discussion.
I don't believe that in order to understand the Constitution, we need to amend it. I believe that we have these kind of debates. We've had them for 187 years. The Constitution does not survive because it's a well-written document. The Constitution survives because the American people choose to make it work, to give it the kind of reverence it deserves, to argue over these kinds of differences as to what it means, and in the process, in good faith, work the thing out. If you look for a document solely on the basis of what it says, how about the Constitution of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics? That is a wonderful document promising all kinds of wonderful things to all kinds of people. But it didn't work, and it didn't preserve anybody's rights in spite of what it said, because it didn't have the people behind it supporting it and resolving the kinds of differences we're talking about, the kinds of differences that existed between Hamilton and Jefferson, the kinds of differences that occurred between Lincoln and some of his cabinet. We as Americans make the Constitution work, and we should be proud of the fact that we've done it pretty well for 187 years.